Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to the gift that keeps on giving. Thursday Night Football Showdown style here at Establish the Run. We've said that there have been some bad games, Cody, before this year, and we have had some really ugly, not uninspiring games, including, what was that, Mitch Trubisky versus Bailey Zappi or whatever it was last week.
Yeah.
But man, hard to think it's worse than this, which is not only is it Easton Stick versus Aiden O'Connell, which truly feels like your wheelhouse in the preseason, but we are missing Keenan Allen in this game. We are missing Justin Herbert in this game. We are missing probably Josh Jacobs in this game. Man, oh man. Cody, I know you're feeling a little under the weather. Sorry to add insult to injury with this game. How's everything going, bud?
You know what? Honestly, this one kind of perked me up. And sorry to everyone listening. I probably sound a little bit more like Patrick Mahomes than my normal self with the raspy voice, but we're going to power through nonetheless. This honestly does feel like August in December. You know, it's week 15. We're starting to get to the point of the season where I'm not going to throw out any tanking accusations. I know that folks are dealing with legitimate injuries, but come on. We're dealing with Easton Stick versus, potentially Aiden O'Connell. I know there were some question marks floating around out there who's actually going to start at quarterback tonight. This one really does feel like a preseason game. And, I think for people paying attention, for people trying to think through roster construction thoughtfully, hopefully you'll get paid off if, the game kind of gets a little wonky, which honestly, looking at this one, I kind of expect it to.
Yeah, hard to not. We're going to move a little fast here. We both have hard outs around 330, 340. So we'll go quickly. But Cody, it's hard to say because pricing is obviously so loose now on this slate, but did anything stand out to you macro wise or construction wise here?
Yeah, first thing I think we should note is that salary simply does not matter on this slate. Of course, you're going to run into lineups where you plug in the top two guys and the quarterbacks, and suddenly you're okay. You're approaching that salary cap. But given the injuries that we had coming into the slate and the injuries that we're dealing with now with Keenan Allen already being ruled out, Josh Jacobs assumed out, we've got backup quarterbacks galore, we've got pass catchers coming in and out of the lineups. Salary truly does not matter. If you're somebody that likes to bully the optimizer around a little bit more to try and get more unique roster constructions, and you're somebody that likes to set your salary cap at, say, 49.5 or 49.6 or something like that, I would strongly suggest, if you're somebody that likes to do that, to come down even more, maybe the even like the 49 flat range. I don't want to throw out anything too aggressive, but truly, given the way that the salary construction works on the slate, you can run lineups that are using 45, 46K in salary and feel pretty good about how often they're going to be optimal. So throw salary out the window. We'll talk about cash for a little bit, but that really doesn't matter. And then from kind of a macro build perspective, I see things trending a little bit more Raiders heavy. But Gary, you've got the screen pulled up with roster construction breakdown. I actually think it'll be a little bit more balanced than we're projecting right now. There isn't a whole lot inspiring confidence on the Raiders side to get you into that 4-2 Raiders heavy stuff. So I think maybe we'll see a little bit more 2-4 and even more 3-3 than we're projecting here now. The one thing to keep in mind, if you think this game goes sideways one way or another, the Raiders go out to an early lead and start to blow out the Chargers, or vice versa, you are going to get paid off with really, really, really low ownership on those 5-1 and 1-5 onslaughts. So again, if you're somebody that likes to think through unique roster construction, I think both of those offer a little bit of benefit in terms of getting away from the field a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive right into quarterback then. Really crazy that we are here week one of the fantasy playoffs, best ball playoffs, really all playoff formats. And we are going to be led by an Aiden O'Connell and Easton Stick offenses with a bunch of ragtag skill position guys on both sides, if we're being honest. So let's start with O'Connell, who, was threatened, it sounded like, to potentially move back to the bench in favor of Jimmy Garoppolo. Antonio Pierce did not pull that lever. He is sticking with the rookie AOC. Got to imagine there's some chance he's on a short leash here. Like, I think there's a non-zero shot that we see Jimmy G tonight, depending on how things go. But for now, we have O'Connell at $200 more. Base projection, basically identical to Easton Stick. Ceiling projection, a little bit higher, but also kind of identical. Total ownership, captain ownership, everything kind of looks the same here. What are your feelings on the Raiders quarterback here tonight?
Yeah, my feelings changed a lot since I wrote this game up yesterday. And I think at this point now, let's just get cash out of the way. But I think at this point now, both of these guys are probably in the best cash game lineup, as crazy as it sounds. When I wrote the game up, I didn't feel like either piece was really a necessity because you could get onto Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, and Devontae Adams and kind of feel like you really locked up a majority of the volume on both offenses. Well, now Keenan's out, and you really don't have the salary to distribute elsewhere if you're not playing one or both of these guys. So I think both do make sense for cash game contests, as crazy as that sounds. From a tournament perspective, and this has kind of been my philosophy throughout the entirety of the season, I think both of these guys may end up being a little bit under-owned relative to how often they end up being optimal. So you have the salary to spend, so they're not going to end up being, 25, 30% owned like we've seen Bailey Zappi or some of these other guys end up being on Showdown slates past. They're going to be owned because you don't have the salary to spend elsewhere. But I do think maybe they come in like that 45 to 50 range on both of these guys, maybe even low 40s. And I think at that point, they make pretty interesting tournament plays, mostly in the flex and mostly in lineups where you're already rostering a pass catcher from their team at captain or pass catchers from their team at flex. Either way, I think is fine. I will say, keeping with that tournament theme, I think Easton Stick has a little bit more captain upside, given the fact that we've got a bunch of low ceiling type plays on the slate outside of the obvious guys. I think Stick could potentially separate. I won't go as far as to say he's a running quarterback, but he is mobile. He's shown some legs dating back to the preseason days. He had a preseason game just this year against the Saints where he went like 763-2 on the ground. That did include a 1-yard rushing touchdown. I don't think he'll be afraid to call his own number. I don't think he's going to go out there and run 10 times like Jalen Hurts or anything, but I do think there's a little bit of mobility upside here with Stick. And, as bad as it is for them to be without Keenan, he still has Austin Eckler, still has what we hope is a talented rookie receiver. Joshua Palmer is going to be back. And I think that for as long as Easton Stick has been in this offense and been a part of the Chargers organization, I think it kind of makes sense for them to see what they've got in him. I think he's been around since like 2019, and this is going to be his first game starting for them in the regular season. So I think it kind of makes sense for them to see what they have in the backup. And I don't think they're going to go extremely pass heavy, but I think they might end up being a little bit more pass heavy than the Raiders. And for that reason, I think he's got a little bit of captain upside.
Yeah, I think that was a really good breakdown. The only thing I'll add in agreement with you that I like Stick better at captain is the fact that with no Keenan Allen, you don't have that absolute superstar receiver that you say, okay, if he's getting there, I'd rather this guy in captain, right? You still have that on the Raiders with Devontae Adams. It's been rough under Aiden O'Connell, but the targets are still there. We know the talent's still there. There's still 30-point upside in Devontae Adams. If you're really attacking that Raiders pass offense, you probably want to try to get Adams in the captain spot. This is not the same thing on the Chargers. You have Josh Palmer back. We don't know how involved he's going to be. With Quentin Johnson hanging around, these ragtag groups of tight ends and third and fourth receivers. The only guy you can make that argument for is Austin Eckler. And yeah, sure, if there's ever a pass catching running back that I would kind of group in as a receiver, it would be Eckler, but still he's a running back. Like, it's not the same type of situation. When I want Eckler and captain, I just want Eckler and captain. It doesn't mean I'm dragging him along with Stick sometimes. But I do agree that there's a lot of juice, I think, or maybe a lot is a big word, but a significant amount of more juice to Stick as a captain tonight than O'Connell. I think that's an interesting point for sure. All right, let's go over to running back. We'll start on the Chargers side with now who is, him or Devontae Adams are the most important skill position guy on the slate. I would argue Eckler here. When we did a Chargers game pretty early in the season, it was like the first time Keenan Allen and Eckler were both going to be on the field together, and I was making all these anti-Keenan Allen cases. And that was before the way Keenan Allen's been used in this offense with Kellen Moore, et cetera. And it's really went the opposite way. I used to say how, hey, when Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen on the field, Keenan Allen's target share goes down, his ceiling goes down. This year, it's been the other way around. Maybe that's partly because Austin Eckler has been battling with an ankle injury, I think, for most of the year that has been gone on talked about. Maybe he's just on the wrong side of the age model. Maybe the juice just isn't there as much for Eckler, but he has not put up, mid first round value, et cetera. There's probably not that many shares of him in the Best Ball Mania finals, if you will. However, Keenan Allen out tonight, a quarterback making his first career regular season start. Someone that after Justin Herbert went down last week was targeting Austin Eckler quite a bit. I think this is the Austin Eckler week. If there's ever been an Austin Eckler week, just to at least, be back to those 10 type catch games, it's got to be this one, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, this is, we're talking week 15. The Chargers are eliminated from playoff contention. They've put their star quarterback on injured reserve. They've ruled out Keenan Allen with, maybe a little bit of a weak heel injury, ankle injury. Maybe he could have played through it if they were in contention type of thing. So there's always some chance that there's some tomfoolery here where they just decide, okay, this is the game where we're going to use Isaiah Spiller a bunch, or this is the game where this is Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller's backfield. I don't really think Brandon Staley or Kellen Moore operate that way. I don't really think Austin Eckler is going to be suited up and expect that to be the case. So if he's suited up, if he's active, we should kind of anticipate a normal role for him. And despite some of the coach speak last week, that was still a really good role for him. You know, we heard Brandon Staley say that there were going to be a little bit more competition for touches in the backfield. That really ended up only affecting Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller, who was active for the first time last week since week 8. This is going to be the Austin Eckler safety blanket for the young quarterback, inexperienced quarterback against a Raiders defense that is already giving up a bunch of receptions to opposing running backs. This seems like kind of a slam dunk, set it and forget it type spot. Because we have the salary to spend, we're already projecting 79.4% total ownership. Look, man, you're going to be in some contest tonight where this is going to come in like right around 90, maybe even above 90. I kind of look at those situations and just shrug and think, yeah, maybe he's a little bit over-owned relative to how often he finds an optimal lineup. And then at that point, you can make a case to try and get a fade in. I think this is a spot where you just kind of set it and forget it. I think the captain ownership is right, maybe even a little bit light. And for me, if anything, I'm trying to come in overweight both total and captain ownership on Austin Eckler, who I think when we're talking about just trying to get raw points, I think he's going to be right up there with the slate's highest overall score.
Yeah, I think he's the safest play on the slate. I really do. And I know that's a weird thing to say about Austin Eckler in a kind of a down year where, hey, maybe he isn't as much of a bell cow as in the past. And we can kind of use that to talk about these next guys, right? It looked like Isaiah Spiller overtook Josh Kelly as the RB2 last week. Mix that with the fact that Josh Kelly is way overpriced at 6'8", kind of going off some priors of being the clear backup to Eckler for most of the season. And that makes Kelly pretty much unplayable. I know salary doesn't matter, outside of the largest field, MME sprinkle to me. That's where Kelly can get in there. Looks like they want to see what they have in Spiller at this point. Somebody you could definitely sprinkle in there in Spiller, but anyway, you're approaching these backup Chargers running backs.
Yeah, I was kind of curious to see where the market was at on Spiller and Kelly. And look, it's only a 1-game sample, and it really wasn't even that drastic of a split between Spiller and Kelly. It was Spiller as the RB2, Kelly kind of as the RB3, really didn't play much. I think the fact that Kelly is 6,800 and going to be roughly as owned as Isaiah Spiller almost entirely removes him from consideration. Like if he was 3,800 and Spiller was 3,800 and they were roughly the same ownership, then suddenly we can start to have that discussion a little bit more. But man, like they left him at 6,800. I don't know what you can do with that based off of our assumptions going into the game. If he beats me at 4 or 5% ownership, I will live with that and kind of move on. Spiller's a little bit more interesting. 3,800 is going to keep him at least in play a little bit, but it's not going to come with a ton of ownership because we're going to talk about some guys next on the other side of the ball. That profile is really, really, really strong values. So where I thought maybe Spiller would come with a little bit more ownership, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen because of like Zamir White and some of these other guys that present as really good value. So I do think, especially in large field tournaments, Isaiah Spiller, either as a pivot away from Eckler or playing him alongside Eckler is a really interesting option at only 3% ownership.
For sure. All right, let's talk about that other side because Josh Jacobs is not expected to play at this point, or at least we do not have it that way. Has not practiced all week. I think I saw very questionable, probably trending more towards doubtful here. And we did go ahead and pull that trigger to remove him from projection. So what does that mean? That leaves Zamir White likely as our base down back. I was just saying to Cody off air, there were a lot of people drafting a lot of Zamir White in those, mid-July days when it looked like Josh Jacobs was really going to hold out and potentially miss some games in best ball. Now, if you were able to sneak some of those through, that may pay off for you tonight because he is expected to have a big workload, only 3K on DraftKings here. And that makes him the chalky play of the night, the salary saving guy you want tonight. Definitely a cash game, probable lock in my opinion. We have not really gotten a chance to see Zamir White as a bell cow. Every time that we think we're getting that, Josh Jacobs just comes in and handles 80+% of snaps, etc. So I don't know too much about Zamir White other than he's been around, somebody that I think they're going to trust to carry the first and second down stuff. Any thoughts here on Zamir?
Yeah, this is really interesting because this kind of comes down to a game theory type play, and ultimately, I suppose you could say after lock when we see how usage shakes out between Zamir White and Amir Abdullah, it could come down to a do you know ball type take, because as you look at the ownership gap between in this backfield, Zamir White 3K, much higher base projection. Obviously, based off of our projections, you would assume that ETR is assuming that Zamir White is going to be the base down back, kind of be the de facto Josh Jacobs now that he has been ruled out or is assumed to be ruled out. 60% total ownership, 15% captain ownership. Meanwhile, pass catching specialist, or at least pass catching specialist when Josh Jacobs is healthy, Amir Abdullah, 4,800, less than 10% total ownership, less than 1% captain ownership. So if you have a different read than maybe the ETR projection team or Gary and I here, good spot to get paid off if you want to be different and be contrarian and assume that maybe Amir Abdullah takes a little bit more of a workload here with Josh Jacobs out. I think the way that I see it, just talking through this backfield in terms of its touch distribution, I do think Zamir White is going to, for all intents and purposes, serve in the Josh Jacobs role. Maybe Amir Abdullah gets a few more between the tackles carries than he normally would with Jacobs healthy. But think, Zamir White is 80, 90% Josh Jacobs or something along those lines. And at 3K, going to be really, really, really tough to get away from in cash game contests for sure. I think he's a lock. Even in tournaments, though, man, it's going to be tough to try and come in under that number and build teams that project well. So I think if you're telling yourself a case where you don't want Zamir White, you're kind of talking yourself into a case where he doesn't get much work. And if that's the case, then you probably want to be a little bit heavier on Amir Abdullah. There are a few things working for Zamir White, though. Mostly just kind of comes down to his pedigree. He's a 6 foot, 215-pound back that they took in the 4th round of the 2022 draft. This is kind of your prototypical grinder. He profiles a lot like Josh Jacobs in the sense of, build and touch profile. So I think that I agree with our projection team on where we have Zamir White and the Amir Abdullah distribution. But if you think it's wrong, good chance to play a little bit contrarian in this backfield and get paid off in a big way if it ends up being Amir's backfield.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of your classic Zamir White gets the early down, Amir Abdullah gets the 3rd down. But it's still, there's some guessing there because as inefficient of a season Josh Jacobs has had, or as not as explosive of a season as he's had compared to 2022, the guy still carried the ball 233 times. Yeah. Has 54 targets. Like, it's a true bell cow role still. Zamir White has all of 20 carries this year, 6 targets, 6 receptions. Amir Abdullah has all of 6 carries this year, has that 14 catches on 19 targets. It's like a 5% share for the whole season. Like, it's not, these are low roles for these guys. So we are guessing a little bit. I do think that's kind of what we'd see. I don't think we're going to see Zamir White step into a Josh Jacobs role where he's going to play, 80% of the snaps or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's a chance he's your thumper and Amir Abdullah comes in. I think you can definitely play them together. We have people in chat asking about that. If you want to go Raiders heavy, I'd imagine they want to keep the ball, on the ground, short down and distance stuff. Like, this is a 34-point total, So all things considered there. Any interest in Brandon Bolden? Do we think he'll be involved at all? I guess he's the other guy that we have for a projection, but barely.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so much. I think he would just be there to get any sort of mop up and potentially be in line for more rushing work if Zamir White were to get injured in game or something along those lines. Of course, we're not projecting those things out. So I don't think Brandon Bolden is too much in play tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be like a 150, like not hoping, but maybe thinking somebody gets hurt type of play. But yeah, and so both Abdullah and White to me are interesting because it's like a true 2-man split backfield here if Josh Jacobs does go down.
And this, all
right, go ahead.
Frankly, it's a pretty good spot too from a rushing perspective. This isn't a situation where we've seen the Raiders be favorites often this year. They are 3-point home favorites still against Easton Stick, so you could see them jump out to an early lead and potentially lean on the ground game. And we know Amir Abdullah is going to get that pass down work as well, maybe get a few more rushing attempts. So I think playing them both together is fine. But I think if you just want to lean into Zamir White too, that's totally okay. This is a Chargers defense that has the 6th lowest stuff rate and is allowing 1.4 yards before contact per attempt. Really good spot, I think, for them to just kind of churn yards on the ground.
Yeah, we've been able to run against the Chargers for years now, it seems. Yeah. All right, let's talk about the Raiders pass catchers here. Certainly more interesting names than anyone on the Chargers with their top 2 names in Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers. It's been rough sledding for Davante for a lot of this year, a couple of spike games in the early part of the season. But, as I mentioned, there was still a couple huge target games for Davante Adams over the last couple of weeks with AOC. So I don't think it's something you can completely rule out by any means. I mean, I don't think you should completely rule out. I mean, I don't think it's something that you should be looking to aggressively take a stance under the field. I still think he's got potentially the highest ceiling on the slate. Like maybe Eckler has a higher floor on this slate. I think Devontae Adams is right up there for highest ceiling though.
Yeah, I agree. And I wish I could have come out with these hot takes and say that I want to get way underweight an 80% owned Devontae Adams or a 25% at captain owned Devontae Adams and Austin Eckler. I just don't see it tonight. There's at some point you have to prioritize raw points. These guys clearly have the two highest ceilings on the slate. And if you told me I could only roster two captains and it was either Devontae Adams and Austin Eckler, or I'd get the field, I would just take Devontae Adams and Austin Eckler and rather just get 50% of each of those guys versus anybody else in the entire field. So I think that their high ownership projection at captain is right for both of them. High total ownership is right for both of them. It does strike me, though, if you're looking for a way to get leverage, it does strike me as one of those classic Gary Hartman spots where maybe you do end up with 70% total ownership, but like 30% of that total ownership or 40% of that total ownership on either of these guys comes at captain. And you just kind of hope to run into one of those alpha games. We haven't really seen it from Devontae Adams recently, just like we haven't seen it from Austin Eckler too much, but I still think that underlying usage is there. And if there's anybody on the slate that can pop off in a big way that's still on the slate, isn't injured, I think it's Austin Eckler and Devontae Adams. So I love both of those guys. I wish I could tell you that they're going to come with lower ownership or anything like that, but just know that you're running into a bunch of it and you're going to have to use your 5 other roster spots to find ways to get different.
Yep. And then Jacoby Myers, obviously the next guy in contention here, has been rock solid for most of this season. I think has come, crashing back down to earth after some big games, like in the middle of the season's week 1 through 7. He was having a bunch of big games. Did have a 20-pointer in KC 2 weeks ago where he found the end zone, but just target stay super steady. I think at this point under Aiden O'Connell, you may need that touchdown upside to really get there at this 8-6 tag. But I'm not saying that's not possible for Jacoby at this point. And you're getting a lot of, if you're not looking to play them together or Raiders doubles, you're getting a lot of ownership discount on Devontae Adams. And usually I would say if Adams does not hit, Myers has a higher chance of hitting.
Yeah, agreed. I kind of got the sense as we were coming into the slate with Keenan Allen still assumed healthy that we might get a little bit of an ownership discount on Jacoby Myers, but now we've got the salary to get up there. So I think he's ultimately going to come with ownership and think he probably ends up being a little bit over-owned as a result, just because we've got the money to get up there. But as you can see, it's a 10.4 base projection. And frankly, since AOC took over, the role for Jacoby Myers hasn't really been that great. He was kind of a 1B to Adams's 1A. And recently he's kind of settled in as like a firmly settled into the wide receiver 2 spot. Really hasn't done much in terms of his target share or air yard share. His usage profile is kind of weak now at this point. So I get it because we've got the money to get there. But if we're looking for spots to maybe come in a little bit underweight on some of these high-owned, expensive guys, I think Jacoby would be the first guy that I'm looking at.
Fair enough. Let's move right along here for these other 2 guys I want to talk about, and Hunter Renfrow and Michael Mayer. Renfrow, somebody that's kind of re-entered our lexicon over the last couple of weeks, where the role has been good enough to continue to use. Now we haven't really gotten too much box score production out of Hunter Renfrow, but 14 targets, at least according to the DraftKings metric over the last 3 weeks, is something that you like to see out of the slot man.
Yeah, agreed. I think this would be like the one interesting pivot from Zamir White. Obviously it's not coming with a lot of high volume, high ceiling type usage, but I think that there are outcomes where you could get a couple of catches from Hunter Renfrow. And then, of course, if he finds the end zone, you're catching yourself doing backflips. So I think Hunter Renfrow, Michael Mayer at 4K and 3,200, not going to come with a ton of ownership simply because we have Zamir White right there. But I think those 2 guys stand out as pretty good pivots who are, roughly in the same price point and kind of get you onto the same type of roster construction, but going to be a 3rd or a 4th as owned. And I think still have cases to be made for putting up ceilings that could compete or beat Zamir White.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's move on to the Chargers side for pass catchers. I think with all his value on this slate, probably not too interested in going into that real bottom barrel on the Raiders. But if you do have any questions, you can try to ask them in Discord, and we'll see if we can get to them later on those secondary Raiders pieces. All right, Keenan Allen ruled out already. Josh Palmer returned, I think should be pretty full here. He's been practicing for a while. Sounded like he was pretty close to coming back last week. My concern with Josh Palmer isn't that don't think anything's bad about him tonight. 6,200 should run as like the de facto wide receiver 1, etc. My concern about Josh Palmer is I don't know how talented he is when he's the main guy. He doesn't have Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and all these guys and Mike Williams taking away attention for him. Now he's running as the wide receiver 1. Now maybe he has a bunch of first reads, etc., but hasn't played in a while. No protection from a coverage standpoint. Defensive coverage going away from him. That all kind of scares me on Josh Palmer. How are you feeling about the return of Palmer here tonight?
Yeah, this is the spot. I know we talk about this a lot, Gary, that if we knew one position, how the box score shook out for one position on the slate, one position group on the slate, for me on this slate, it would be the Chargers wide receivers. I want to know how playing time is going to be distributed. I want to know if Joshua Palmer is going to come back into a full-time role. I want to know who Easton Stick is going to target. And if I had a sense of that, I feel like I could pretty confidently construct rosters tonight. I think I'm a little bit less concerned than maybe some of the coach speak stuff on Joshua Palmer that we saw from Brandon Staley earlier in the week. He said that he would be back, but maybe not back in a full-time role. And we've kind of reflected that a little bit in his base projection as well. But he's been full all week, no injury designation. I think maybe they treat him with kid gloves a little bit, but I think the fact that Keenan Allen's out, the fact that they haven't gotten a lot of production from Quentin Johnston, the fact that they don't have DeAndre Carter, who is now on the Raiders, but last year served as kind of the replacement for Keenan Allen when he was out. I think they're going to throw Joshua Palmer out there for a good majority of the reps, and I think there's a ceiling there on him as well. So I do like Joshua Palmer at 5.7% captain ownership. I think in order to get above that number, you might have to crank our projection up a little bit in your optimizer of choice. Otherwise, it's probably not going to come through a little for you too much. But I do think there's a ceiling there. We've seen big games from him when Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are out. Of course, the efficiency is going to take a big dip going from Herbert to Easton Stick, but I do still think there's some big games there for Joshua Palmer. Quentin Johnston, man, I don't know. Maybe you could say that Easton Stick unlocked him a little bit last week. He went 279-0 in the second half with Easton Stick under center. I think that's probably just a little bit fluky. He still hasn't been a guy that's earning targets at a significant clip. And even with Keenan out, I don't think he's going to earn targets at a significant clip. So I know he's coming through now with a lot of ownership. Maybe you could talk yourself into it for that reason. But pretty tough for me to get excited about Quentin Johnston at this point of his young career. And then we get into these cheap guys before we go back to the tight ends. We get into these cheap guys like Jalen Guyton, Alex Erickson, and Darius Davis. And my initial inkling was okay, maybe Darius Davis, kind of a shorter, smaller, shiftier type guy, could get a little bit more work in the slot. But I think that they ultimately will roll out Alex Erickson in that role and keep Darius Davis as kind of a gadget type player. We saw Alex Erickson in a couple of games with these wide receivers, other wide receivers banged up. Alex Erickson get a pretty decent playing time split. And I think we'll probably see that again tonight. He ran around on 69% of dropbacks last week as well. So I think that there's probably some favor there. He can run out of the slot. He can run on the perimeter, a guy that they can try to get the ball to in a variety of ways. I think as a way to get different, I know we don't really need the salary relief, but maybe if you drop down from like one of these 4 or 5K guys to Erickson at 1K, then you'll leave a couple $1,000s on the table. You get a guy that's lower owned. Ultimately, you'll end up being more unique. For that reason, I think these guys down here are actually pretty interesting in Guyton and Erickson. I probably don't want to play them together, but I do think that they're both relatively interesting. So I like those guys. And then, jumping back to the tight end position, when I was writing up the slate, these guys didn't look that interesting, but now they look a little bit more interesting because of the volume that opens up when looking at Everett in comparison to like Quentin Johnston. I think I prefer Everett straight up, roughly the same ownership, roughly the same price tag, roughly the same base projection. I think Everett could serve as kind of a safety blanket for Easton Stick as well. So if we're to choose in that price range, I think I would prefer Mr. Everett there.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't have much to add. We have chat saying Easton Stick loved his tight ends at college from an NDSU alum. Okay, that's good to know. I don't really want to play those two guys together. There's just still enough here between Keenan, Palmer, Quentin, and those kind of Guyton, Erickson guys where I don't think you need to play 2 tight ends tonight. I wouldn't fully roll it out in 150, but yeah, Everett, without Keenan should have a pretty big role, I would imagine. All right. Let's talk DSTs and kickers and we will get out of here. Cody. Defense here tonight. Part of the reason that both these teams have struggled is I don't particularly think either defense is that great, but you have two quarterbacks that absolutely should be able to be attacked. A little bit more ownership on the Raiders D, a little bit more ceiling on the Raiders D as well, it seems. You have a preference? Like, I mean, you can make the argument that attacking a player with their first career start is always something of interest. But I don't think Aiden O'Connell is not mistake prone himself.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we're talking about a rookie quarterback in Aiden O'Connell. We're talking about he's been around for a while, but Easton Stick, who's getting his first start tonight on the road. Neither of these defenses inspire much confidence in terms of their ability to get to the quarterback to force pressure. But I think at some point you kind of have to just throw that out the window and realize that you've got two young quarterbacks who can be mistake prone in their own right. So I think both of these defenses are interesting. You're partially seeing a little bit of modest ownership here simply because you don't need the salary relief to get down to them. But I do think as parts of whether it's 4-2 or 2-4 or 5-1 and 1-5 type onslaughts, I think both of these guys are pretty interesting. So both of these teams' defenses are pretty interesting, I should say. So I do like them. I'll mostly be mixing them in lineups that are heavy on that team's offense. So if I'm running out a 4-2 Raiders team, don't mind using the Raiders defense in that. Same thing with a 5-1 and then vice versa as well. For me, still don't see a lot of interest in them at captain, even with 3.5% ownership. So for me, mostly going to be reserved to flex only.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I was going to bring up the captain conversation with them. I mean, only 3%. Like, I don't know. I could see it more tonight with a game that gets super ugly. Mentioning the Raiders' offensive line issues, two quarterbacks I don't trust at all. If they do have any propensity to throw, I think some real mistakes can be made. So, and if the game goes way under, like I can see it more than I usually can, at least I would say. Both kickers seem pretty good to me tonight as well. You got Dicker, the kicker, of course, and Daniel Carlson. A lot more ownership on Carlson. I don't know if that's just leaning into the Raiders onslaught stuff, a little bit of salary relief, but I don't have much of a lean one way or the other. You have any kicker thoughts?
Yeah, maybe this gap in ownership comes in a little bit closer than we have it projected here, but I think part of it's the $400 savings from Dicker to Carlson. I think part of it's the fact that Carlson's got a higher team total. He's at home. He's got a higher base projection. So I think it all kind of checks out. They do both strike me as pretty good options. The cash game team that I built before I came on the show just by hand could not fit Carlson. I wish it could. I feel pretty good about it. So I might have to go back and tweak some things, but I do think that they're both going to be, fairly owned. And I think both of them make for interesting, again, flex options in small and large field tournaments.
Yeah. Raiders offensive line banged up. Chad is confirming. So that's something to consider both from a defense perspective, but also if you're into Amir Abdullah or something like that, I think is more interesting for the short down and distance stuff. All right, Cody, we've done it. We've kept it nice and tidy here. I've never been less excited to flag plant a game in my life, but who are you feeling here tonight?
I can't go with I can't go with Austin Eckler or Devontae Adams, who are probably the only two players on the entire slate that I feel even remotely good about. But I'm going to kind of go in that same vein. Expensive on the expensive end. I think we can now fairly confidently roster him and the quarterback on the opposing sideline because of the salary relief that we have further down the board. But I'm going to go with the guy that broke my heart in preseason, Easton Stick. Easton Stick had 2 rushing touchdowns on a game where I needed him to do anything but have 2 rushing touchdowns in order to come away with a showdown bank in preseason. So I'm going to hope he repeats that 2 touchdown rushing performance from the preseason in August here in December and walks away as the optimal captain on tonight's slate.
I'm going to go with the classic pivot flag plant with Amir Abdullah here. You got paying up $1,800 from Zamir White. I do think he'll have all that pass down work. We're talking about these Raiders offensive line issues. That both is a hindrance, not only to somebody that's trying to run between the tackles, but any kind of time that Aiden O'Connell might have. Wouldn't be surprised to see some check down stuff going on. Maybe Stick does surprise. This could be a solid correlation piece with your flag plant because I like him more as a bring back in Charger stuff than I do Zamir White. So I just think Zamir White's going to get a ton of attention. I don't think Amir Abdullah is, and I think Amir Abdullah is, only a 2-man backfield basically. I think Amir Abdullah is very interesting on this slate. So that's where I'll go. Nothing like a week 15 Thursday Night Football where Amir Abdullah is one of the flag plants. You know, we're running hot. And Easton Stick, I mean, come on. Definitely not on the bingo card. All right. Some fun news for you all. We will be back tomorrow with a 3-man show. Cody, assuming he's up for it, with his myself and Adam to cover Saturdays. It's going to be like a Saturday version of a Friday afternoon version of Establish the Show, except instead of the great Evan Silva and Andrew Wiggins, you get Cody and myself for the 3-game Saturday slate. Excited to break that down for you all. I don't know if that's paywalled or not, so I may just be marketing all this to you for nonsense. But if you're a subscriber, congratulations. If you're not a subscriber, what are you doing? Go subscribe. Anyway, that'll do it for this Thursday night game. Enjoy it. Hopefully it provides some more fun for us than we're expecting. Hopefully you all get off to a great start in your best ball playoffs, fantasy playoffs, etc. Cody, anything else to add for the people?
I think that's it. I'm being told this is my flu game yep. Flag plant. So I hope that comes to fruition. No pressure on me, no pressure on Easton Stick. We'll see how things go.
No pressure at all. All right. We will see you all tomorrow. If you're not available to join our show tomorrow, or if you're not a subscriber and it is paywalled, we will see you on Monday. Take care, everybody. Good luck.